Ever wish you could manage every server, on-prem, Azure, and other clouds from one place? That's exactly what Azure Arc is built to do. Hello everyone, I'm Travis and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to break down what Azure Arc is, why it matters, and the real value it adds to a modern IT environment. And at the end, we'll walk through a hands-on example where I Arc enable a Windows computer so you can see it in action. Before we jump in, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also check out my courses if you want to go deeper. Those links are below. And a quick shout out to my channel members. Thank you for your support. All right, back to it. Let's start with a simple question. What is Azure Arc? In short, Azure Arc extends Azure management to resources outside of Azure by giving you a consistent management experience for computers running on-premises or in other clouds. So what does that actually mean? Well, think about an Azure virtual machine. With an Azure VM, we can apply policies, assign RBAC roles, run custom scripts, view inventory, and manage configuration centrally. Azure Arc takes many of those same capabilities and extends them to physical servers and virtual machines running in your data center or in other cloud providers. This video is focused on Windows computers, but Azure Arc isn't limited to Windows. It works with Linux as well, and it can also manage VMware vCenter, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, Kubernetes clusters, Azure Data Services, that's a SQL managed instance running on Kubernetes, and even SQL Server itself. There is no charge just to Arc enable a computer. Core capabilities like inventory and tagging and management using Secure Shell or custom script extensions are included at no cost. That said, there are optional add-on services, things like Microsoft Defender for servers, update management, and hot patching that may have additional fees. And as always, if you have licensing questions, it's best to talk with a licensing specialist. That's not me. When we Arc enable physical and virtual computers, we get a centralized inventory of all the servers across all environments. That gives us a single place to audit and understand the entire server estate, regardless of where those machines are actually running. Those computers can be protected using cloud-based security tools like Microsoft Defender and Microsoft Sentinel, and we can monitor them using VM Insights and collect logs by enabling the Azure Monitor Agent, just like we would with native Azure VMs. On the configuration side, there's a lot of flexibility. We can use PowerShell or Python runbooks with Azure Automation, manage patching with Azure Update Manager, create onboarding workflows for new Arc-enabled servers, and push out custom configurations using custom script extensions. In the demo coming up, we're going to onboard a Windows virtual machine, but before we do that, let's quickly review what needs to be in place to get started. First, make sure the required resource providers are registered in your Azure subscription. This is mandatory before you can Arc enable any computer. Next, the Azure Arc agent needs outbound access over TCP port 443. By default, it uses standard internet connectivity to reach the Azure services, but it can be configured to use a proxy server if that's required for your environment. Microsoft also publishes a list of URLs that the agent needs access to if you're locking down outbound traffic. I've linked that documentation in the comments below. You'll need an Azure resource group, and even though the computer itself isn't running in Azure, Azure still creates an Arc machine resource that represents the computer. That resource and the resource group it lives in must be associated with an Azure region. Just like any other Azure resource, you can apply tags. Azure Arc includes built-in physical location tags, which describe where the machine actually lives, things like data center, city, and country or region. You can also use your own custom tags, so having a tagging standard in place is a big win here. Of course, permissions matter. To onboard a computer, you'll need the Azure Connected Machine onboarding role or contributor role on the resource group. Reader access is required as well, and you'll need elevated rights to run a PowerShell script on the computer. To manage the machine after onboarding, you'll need the Azure Connected Machine Resource Administrator role. In the demo, I'm using a Windows 11 client running on Hyper-V, but the process is the same for Windows Server. One thing to keep in mind is that Arc-enabled Windows clients need to behave like a server. That means they should be connected to the internet and powered on consistently. A VDI environment, for example. With that covered, let's head over to the Azure portal and walk through the setup. Here we are in the Azure portal. There are two high-level steps to Arc enabling a Windows computer. First, we create an onboarding script. Then second, we run that script on a computer. We'll start by going to Arc in the Azure portal. From here, we'll go to Machines under Infrastructure. Next, we'll select Onboard and Create, then choose Onboard Existing Machine. The other option, Create a Machine in a Connected Host Environment, is used for onboarding Azure Local, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, or vSphere. First, we'll select the subscription and resource group, or create a new resource group if needed. Next, select the region and the operating system. And for this example, we don't need to connect to SQL Server. We can uncheck that. For connectivity, this example will use public endpoint. There is also an option to use a private endpoint if ExpressRoute or a VPN connection is in place. We can add a proxy server URL and an Arc gateway if needed. For this example, we'll leave both of those fields blank. For authentication, we'll leave it set to authenticate machines manually. There's another option to use a service principal. Let me know if you'd like to learn more about that. We'll move on to tags. Here we'll add the tags. These can be added or removed as needed. This example will update what's on the screen. And you can add custom tags if needed. And from here we'll click Next. At this point, we're presented with the provisioning script that includes all of our settings. This script can be downloaded and reused, and there's also an option to copy it directly. The rest of the page provides additional information, including a link to outbound internet requirements and a reminder that we'll need local admin rights to run the script. Next, we need to copy the script and run it on the client. I have it copied to this Windows 11 client. Let's go to PowerShell and run it as administrator. Before we can run the script, we have to change the execution policy. For this example, I'll set it to bypass for this session. Next, we'll navigate to the directory and run the script. This will take a minute to run. The video will pause until it's finished. As part of the install, we have to provide credentials to onboard the computer and add the Arc-enabled computer object to Azure. Provide credentials for an account with rights to add the Arc server to Azure. We discussed the required RBAC roles earlier in the video. That finished, let's go to the Arc-enabled machines in the Azure portal. And there it is. If yours doesn't show up right away, give it a couple minutes and make sure to hit the refresh. We now have an Arc-enabled Windows 11 computer. From here, we can view it in the inventory, and we can now manage the on-premises computer in Azure. Next, just as an example, let's install an extension. If we go to Settings, Extensions, we'll add an extension. And for this example, we'll add the Azure Monitor Agent for Windows extension. We'll go Next. This is a pretty simple example. We'll go to Review and Create. And Create. That starts the deployment. And this too will take a couple minutes to finish. I'll pause here until it's done. Okay, so it finished. Now we can verify it was installed by going back to Azure Arc, Machines, open the Arc-enabled computer, and if we go back to Extensions, it shows the Azure Monitor Windows Agent was installed successfully. That is how to onboard a Windows computer to Azure Arc and add an extension. I hope that helps you better understand how Azure Arc works and how to Arc enable a Windows computer. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.